Feel better? Yeah, nice and awake. Good. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit, first about a little bit of the history of yoga, how the Barkan method sort of came about, and then we're going to clinic a couple poses, some poses that are important to really understand and hone in on true alignment technique, so that one, you don't hurt yourself, and two, you're going to get the best results out of your practice.
We're stuck now, guys.
So yoga's been around 6,000 years. For a while they thought it was 5,000 years, but they know now, just with technology, that it was 6,000 years. And they chose the word yoga because the literal translation to yoga means yoke, or union, or joining. And it was the reason why they chose that word is because the intention was, the reason why they developed it in the first place is they wanted to ease the suffering. People were suffering, people were not happy. And which, you know, really continues to perpetuate into today's time. And the reason why they chose the yoga techniques was to find a connection or a joining or a union to everyone, not just to the universe, but to everybody in the universe, so that we're not separate. We have the illusion that we're separate. So they chose the word yoga because we wanted to shatter that illusion. The joining. A lot of people think that yoga means the mind, body, and soul of the individual, and it's really that's the preparation, but it's the joining of the individual or the individual energy or individual prana with the universal prana, or the individual soul to the universals, or to man to the divine, or whatever words you use for your own interpretation and belief of what the divine is or what God is. So it's like the Sistine Chapel, in the center of the Sistine Chapel, there's Adam touching. That's the true meaning of yoga right there. That's the intention. And so the techniques that they developed were to find that connection, so that would ease the suffering, which is pretty much the same philosophy and intention of Buddhism. Same thing. When the Buddhist word for nirvana means extinction. Why they chose that word is the extinction of the suffering, so that we shatter that illusion. So they chose yoga to determine that, or to define that. So, you know, a lot of times you'll hear the word yoga, and right away people think yoga postures. So when you're taking a yoga class, I think you're coming into a room to do postures. And like I said in the very beginning, it's really just a preliminary form, but it's the form that sort of took shape and popularity, especially in this country, in the West. When you say the word yoga in India, they'll think meditation, which is more of the highest level of yoga. And that the postures back then, 6,000 years ago, were meant to, as a preliminary step toward the meditation. But then that changed over the years, over the course of time. So before I get to that, just real brief history of yoga. In the very beginning of yoga, 6,000 years ago till about 2,000 years ago. So the first 4,000 years, yoga was very unstructured. They didn't have much technology then, so they communicated by word of mouth, and it really didn't travel too far because they didn't have the internet. So, yeah. So it wasn't until 2,000 years ago that it started to take its structure and shape. And back 2,000 years ago, right around the time of Christ, became a very popular and powerful and important yogi. And anybody know who that would be? That didn't take my teacher training program? Who do you think that would be?
Paramahans?
No. Yes. 1,000 years too late. No, Patanjali. Patanjali. And Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutras. And in the Yoga Sutras, he created the 8-limb path. He didn't really create it, but he structured, because all the components of the 8-limb path have been around for the last 4,000 years. But he sort of brought it into a roadmap that the yogis used for their way toward their advancement in evolutionary process, their inevitable evolutionary process. So the 8-limb path in Sanskrit is called, somebody tell me?
Ashtanga
For
yoga.
people that did my training.
Come on, guys.
It's called Ashtanga. Asht, 8, Ang or angust, limbs. A lot of people think, when you hear the word Ashtanga yoga, they think of Pattabhi Jois's creation of Hatha yoga, which is about 60, 70 years ago. But he actually borrowed that term from Patanjali to describe his particular style of Hatha yoga. But it really has not that much to do with Patanjali's original Ashtanga yoga that was created 2,000 years ago. So it's interesting that he sort of took that term, because really only he focuses on is the third and the fourth limb, which is asana and pranayama. But the 8 limbs that Patanjali had developed, created, really has not much to do with the Pattabhi Jois's creation of Hatha yoga. So when you hear the term Ashtanga yoga, you'll know that it's not, the true meaning is not Pattabhi Jois's development of this Hatha yoga style, but it's Patanjali's original 8 limbs roadmap to the yogis that he created in the Yoga Sutras, which was his famous scripture he written back 1,000 years or 2,000 years ago. All right, I'm not going to bore you too much with the history. So now we get 1,000 years later, or 1,000 years ago, along comes Matsyendra and Goraksha. These guys had a whole different belief about what the physical world was and what the body was. Because up to that point, the traditionalists, they call the verticalists, way back, they thought the body as a hindrance to the yogic path. That this was a gross distraction to our communion with the divine. That we shouldn't focus on the body at all, we should focus on the spiritual world. Matsyendra and Goraksha came along and they challenged that belief. And they said, no, the body is what we can mostly relate to. The body is what is the most real to us. So we're going to use the body as a vehicle toward finding our own enlightenment in an evolutionary process. So out of this belief system, this is only about maybe 900 years ago. So this is interesting because if you look at yoga, it's 6,000 years old. 6,000 years ago, present day, 800 years ago, right here, right, on the continuum. That's when Hatha yoga started. Hatha yoga is not 6,000 years old. It's only about 800 years old. And the way, especially the way we approach, in Hatha yoga, the way we approach Hatha yoga is very, very big scheme of things. So, Goraksha comes along and creates Hatha or Hatha yoga. And there's another interesting term, Hatha yoga. In the West, that the meaning of Hatha yoga sort of got misinterpreted. Because a lot of people, when you hear Hatha, when you go to a yoga class and you see on the schedule Hatha yoga, a lot of times people think it's a very gentle, relaxed type of yoga, right? Yes? Everybody hear that? And it actually is the opposite of what the true meaning of the word is. Because the word Hatha does not mean sun and the moon. It's symbolized. We've heard sun and the moon, Ha being the sun, Ta being the moon. It's symbolized by the sun and the moon. But it actually means forceful. The word Hatha in Sanskrit is forceful. And the reason why Goraksha chose the word Hatha, or forceful yoga, because his intention was to forcefully, like a hammer hits an anvil, to forcefully awaken the subtle energies inside our bodies, the prana and the kundalini shakti, to awaken those energies up the body, around the chakras, and through the channels we call in Sanskrit the nadis. These physical and ethereal channels are conduits that flow in and around and through us. What's that?
It's like I can hear all their minds going, oh wait, I heard that once in time.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Good. So, the awakening of this energy, to forcefully awaken that energy through asana, through pranayama, through mudra, through the kriyas, the bandhas that help to also channel that energy. This is the mechanics of Hatha yoga. So when this sort of group that chose the word Hatha yoga to describe a gentle form of yoga, it's once again the exact opposite of what it really truly means. Isn't that interesting? I think. And the true styles of Hatha Yoga, according to Goraksha's intention, are Pattabhi Joseph's Ashtanga, Vinyasa styles, Bikram, the Barkan method. These are intense asana and pranayama practices to awaken those subtle energies, not just the Shakti, but the prana as well.
Sure.
Sure did.
Sure did. And we use the heat to, we call hot, now, all right, so let's now get to the modern day time. So now, over the last 800 years, all the different regions of India started to interpret Goraksha's intention. How do we do the triangle? The way Goraksha wanted us to do it, and so on. So like the game of telephone, the message has changed over the last 800 years in all the different regions of India. So our particular style of yoga comes from the eastern part of the country, the state of Bengal, more specifically the city of Calcutta, where it's 110 degrees in summer, and the same humidity as Florida. So it gets hot. So when they say, oh, just open the windows and do yoga, it's 110 degrees. Now the heat index is interesting too, because you really don't want it to be so hot. I know you're a maniac.
Did you hear that already? He said to me, not so much. I'm the junior maniac.
She's a maniac too. That the heat takes away from your concentration, that your focus is just trying to get through and survive. In my philosophy, the heat should just enhance the experience, that your real focus should be on the yoga, so that it's not so hot that it's taking all your attention. So yeah, we disagree. But it really depends on the humidity level too. It's not how hot you get it. Because if you're in Arizona, you could turn the heat to 110, because the humidity level is like 20%. In Florida, you really don't want it to get past 97. Never, because it's too hot. If it's 100 degrees in the summertime in my school, 3/4 of the people will be on the ground halfway through the class. And then, so what's the point? What's the point? So I want them to focus their attention on doing the best yoga they can. And that extra 5 degrees, I don't think it's going to make that much difference, except it's going to put half the room on the floor. As far as your range of motion, it's not going to inhibit your range of motion. It's 97. So,
I've heard you say.
it was crazy too, because in the world of hot yoga, as already you can see, there are disagreements. But in the whole world of yoga, there are disagreements everywhere. Everywhere, all the different philosophies and the belief systems disagree constantly. The traditionalists disagree with Patanjali, because Patanjali believed in a dualistic belief system, that spirit and nature were separate. And that was a very controversial belief system. And then Shankara comes along, and Ramanuja, and they said, no, we believe that there's only one reality, and that the physical world was in that reality. But the physical world is still something we need to get away from, into the spiritual. Then Matsyendra and Goraksha come along and say, no, we believe that the physical world, and especially the body, is the most important, because that's what we can relate to the most. So that's where we come out of that philosophy. Hatha Yoga comes out, and Matsyendra and Goraksha saying that let's use our bodies now as a vehicle toward enlightenment, as a vehicle toward that spiritual growth and evolution. And then all these different styles of Hatha Yoga came about. So in the West, the postures and Hatha Yoga, that's what has become the most popular, because we can most relate to it. We can see results quickly. It's very difficult to see results in meditation. It takes a lot longer for you to sit there for long periods of time and really start to feel that quietness and that connection to the universe. So as Westerners, we can much easier relate to the asanas. So in this country, there's two sort of the most popular groups, not the most important, but the most popular groups of yoga, Hatha Yoga. Over here is us. I call the Vishnu Ghoshites, because Vishnu Ghosh was the sort of forefather, founder of modern day hot yoga. And over here, on this side, is Krishnamacharya, very famous Hatha yogi, and pretty much, maybe a little bit older than Vishnu Ghosh. So now Krishnamacharya had 3 very popular students. B.K.S. Iyengar created Iyengar yoga. And under Iyengar came John Friend, Rodney, Judith Lassiter. Then there was Pattabhi Jois, who created, talked about before, Ashtanga yoga. And out of the Ashtanga yoga came all the vinyasa teachers, Shiva Ray, Brian Kest, Sean Horn, not David Swenson, he's a little Richard Friedman, they're still Ashtanga yogas. And then Desikachar comes out, and that was Krishnamacharya's son. And all his branch, Gary Kraskow, they developed Vinaya. So as you can see, a lot of the most popular styles of yoga are the Krishnamacharya style. So we're sort of a minority over here. And Vishnu Ghosh, one of his top students was Bikram Chowdhury. Bikram came here in the late 70s or mid 70s, and finally migrated to Beverly Hills. That's where he ended up. Because he figured they needed him the most. That was his excuse at that point. And then they pretty much ruined him. He was this very, bright-eyed, naive yogi from India, and then they ruined him.
He was capable. Come on.
Yes. And so, I was Bikram's senior teacher for about 18 years. So I went around and sort of represented Bikram Yoga for about 18 years, doing yoga journal conferences, mega conferences. And he and I eventually, and I used to always say that why was I the senior teacher? Because I was at that point pretty much the only one left of the senior teachers that he hadn't had falling outs with. So that's why I was the senior teacher. And also, because I was all the way in Florida, we were so far apart. Then the internet brought everything so close together, and that pretty much did it in for us. But that's what's interesting about the internet. We were talking about that last night. And Facebook, for example, is really a technological version of yoga because it's bringing the world together. Unless you sit in your house all day long on a computer, that's different. But it's really connecting the world. I mean, I couldn't do what I do now with my teacher train programs. I have people coming from all over the world. There's no way they would have known about me if it wasn't for the internet. And just recently we have 4 schools just opened. Barkan Method Studios just opened in Tokyo. We have 5 schools in Australia, 2 in New Zealand. Thailand, just now opening in Holland, Budapest, Iceland, all over. But there's no way that could have happened if it wasn't for the internet. So that's really pretty cool. Yeah. We try to transcend our egos as we get more. So those are the 2 most important groups. So we're sort of a minority. So what are the differences between hot yoga and